Hi, this is Christian from Dark Portents. Today I'm going to be discussing Norylska Groans, an upcoming novel by Mike Fletcher and Clayton Snyder. I was able to get an advanced review copy from Mike Fletcher and read this amazing novel, and now I'm going to give you a mostly spoiler-free review of it. Norylska Groans comes out on May 10th, and you should buy this thing. If you don't finish the review, just walk away with, you should buy this thing. The pre-order link's going to be down below. On May 10th, the hardcover and softcover of that should be available as well. For now, it's only a Kindle pre-order. But man, this book, it's a grimdark horror book that's sort of a horror, urban fantasy, and mystery thriller all combined. Takes place in an alternate version, fantasy version of early industrial Tsarist Russia, but with some of the more Tsarist-like elements of the Soviet Union sort of incorporated into this early industrial Tsarist setting. And it blends the two very well. Oh, this thing's great. Before I get into it too much, I just want to bring up that I'll also probably be having a more in-depth discussion of this on Christine Valestad's channel, possibly even with the authors if we can get them on. So look forward to that on her channel. I'll link her channel in the description. If you don't follow Christine Valestad, give her a subscription. And, you know, as always, if you're here and you like my videos and you want to see more of them, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Really helps with the algorithm and lets me know what kind of videos people actually like watching, so please do. And without further ado, this review will be mostly spoiler-free. I'm going to talk vaguely about the magic system, the setting, the world building, without really any plot details beyond the premise, and I'll mention the two main characters' names. While I do have a few nitpicks and complaints, overwhelmingly, this will be a positive review. So don't take those nitpicks as me saying I don't like the book. I could not get enough of this thing. I couldn't put this thing down. I've read it so fast. Alright. So, one of the coolest things about the magic system, or about this book, is the magic system. And the magic system really... so it's about these things called stones that are created by these scientists, basically, called Vinificum. And when Vinificum make stones, they make them to store memories or personality traits from people that can then be drawn on by others to access those memories or to alter their personality with those personality traits if they wear the stones. So you have one person wear the stones, and while they're wearing it, whatever they do, whatever they think, whatever they're feeling, gets put in the stones, and whatever attributes, you know, like courage or a sense of desire for fatherly affection or aggression or whatever the case may be, these kind of attributes can be stored by them while they're wearing them, and then they take the stones off. They'll probably be on like a necklace. They take the stones off, you give them to somebody else, and that other person can access those memories, can access the courage, can access the, who knows, sense of relaxation or excitement or whatever the case may be. And it really gets into sort of questions of what is more important for what makes up who you are as a person, what makes up your identity. Is it the memories or is it the personality traits? So is it your experiences, the things you remember that really make up who you are or that are primary, or is it the personality traits that you have? And what's the connection between those things? And it brings up a lot of really cool questions of identity. And one of the things about the memory stones in particular in this magic system is if you are storing memories and then you take off the memory stone that you were storing memories in, you don't remember anything you stored in there, right? And if somebody else wears that memory stone while they're accessing your memories that you stored in there, they are storing memories in the memory stone as well, and they won't remember what they did while they were walking around with your memories. And so this gets into some very interesting territory in terms of, like, you know, when it's part of your day job to wear memory stones to help you become better at whatever job you might be doing, uh, then you go home and you don't remember what you did at work that day, which is sort of like an extension of the concept of alienation of labor, uh, which, if you're not familiar, is like a Marxist concept. I'm sure that you can Google and look into it. We're not here to talk about Marxism, but it it gets into that territory, and there's some very it's like a caricature or a maybe a hyperbolic representation of that idea, and when it deals with that, and the way that, like, you know, having part of your day that you remember both of your lives, and another part of the day where you don't know what you did that day. It builds a lot of tension, builds a lot of mystery. There's bleed between the day life and the night life, and there's some really creepy and interesting stuff that comes out of it. And this seems to be something that Mike Fletcher is really interested in general, because Mike Fletcher also wrote a book recently, actually two books, but I haven't read the second one. The first one was called Blackstone Heart. So the Blackstone Heart by Michael Fletcher also deals with the question of how memory shapes who you are, how memory shapes your identity, and in particular, Blackstone Heart, it begins to deal with the question of if you get your memories assembled in like a different order so that you remember, like, so that like you have one set of memories, and if you add another set of memories here, does that make you a much different person than if it was the other way around, kind of thing? And I won't talk about that too much because we're not here to talk about Blackstone Heart. We're here to talk about Norylska Groans. But Johanna, I believe I'm pronouncing your name right this time, Johanna's channel has a review of Blackstone Heart, which particularly deals with this question of how memory shapes identity, as dealt with by Mike Fletcher in that book. And I'll link that video in the description as well. And if you haven't watched Johanna's channel, it's really great. She's one of the YouTubers that really helped me decide to get back into trying to do a booktube channel. You should check her stuff out too, and she's a Mike Fletcher fan as well. So there's two main characters, point of view characters in this book, one written by each author. So there's Kat, who was written by Mike Fletcher, or whose chapters were written by Mike Fletcher, and there's Gendry. So first I'm going to talk about Kat, rather. First I'm going to talk about Kat. Kat's character is the one, so Kat starts out the book as like kind of a stay-at-home sort of housewife, but she's not married. She's with a fiance or boyfriend, and she's, going out when you meet her, like, to her first day on the job at her new job. So before, she was stay at home, just doing the chores, while her boyfriend he's a lawyer. He's out all day working, while she's at home, chopping the wood because the city's very cold. It's in, what's essentially Russia, or Kievan, as it's called in the book, cooking the meals and so on and so forth. And she decides to get a job to help them, like, move out of the slums, because they live in the slums in Norylska, and she gets a job as a secretary working for the militia, which is a Soviet word for the police. In the book, it's kind of a cross between the police and the military, I think, from what I gathered. But it's, in this more monarchistic, czarist type system, rather than, a Soviet system. And she ends up not, going to work and finding out that she has been volunteered for a different job where they're going to give her the memory stones of a militia agent. And she's going to go around and be a part of the secret police, essentially, like policing the city's crime. And you get some really interesting stuff with Kat's character about, uh, you know, whether she's happy with the life she had before, whether she's happy with this new life that she doesn't even remember when she goes home at the end of the day, how the stuff she does when she's at work that she can't remember affects her life at home. Um, what are the gender role expectations of women in Kievan? And a lot of really interesting stuff comes out of that character. She's a really strong character, really well written. I do have a little bit of a tiny little complaint later on about something with her character, very minor, that would have just been like something to take just an amazing character and bring it even further over the edge, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So for now, I want to talk about the other character, Gendry, who's written by Clayton Snyder, or whose chapters were written by Clayton Snyder. And if anybody's read the Age of Madness trilogy, or the 2 books that are out at least, by Joe Abercrombie, Gendry has a flavor that is very similar, and a story even, in some ways, that are very similar to the character of Gunnar Broad in Joe Abercrombie's Age of Madness trilogy. And of course, I don't know about you, but for me, Gunnar Broad's a great character. So seeing that same character archetype used here, I mean, I don't even know if Clayton Snyder's read that. I'm not saying it's copied or anything, but they're a similar character. It's really great. And I do like Broad a little bit more, but Gendry is a really cool character. He starts out at a meatpacking factory, right at the beginning of the book, gets laid off, and it goes through him and you come to learn that he used to fight in the war, and it sort of deals with like the problems of his memories of the war and his experiences in the war that the Kievans had with these other people called the Altan Ordu. And the Altan Ordu are like sort of these they're like a democratic republican society of some kind, and they're very ostentatious and flamboyant, and it sort of gives the impression that Kievans view them as like morally I don't know, morally disgusting, I guess, and they are terrifying in these flashbacks, and in the story, the Altan Ordu. And he has memories of all the horrible things that the Kievan state made him do, or that he did in the war, and the things he experienced and saw, and the ways that they used the Vinificum and the memory stones in the war, and things like that. And so you get another sort of different outlook with Gendry on how memory affects identity. Now, one thing that I don't know if it would bother most readers, it bothered me a little bit. At first, I don't think it did, but with Gendry's character, there were a lot of vivid flashbacks about every aspect of his life, where he just like dissociates, and it's not even just to the war stuff, but it's to just anything about his life. He like dissociates for like an entire scene in the middle of a scene, and there's a vivid flashback to tell you about his backstory. And it kind of felt like at times it intruded on the narrative and was like sort of disruptive. And maybe that's intentional. I wasn't the biggest fan of that, although I'm not going to say that I didn't enjoy some of the flashback sequences, or that I didn't like the character because of that. But, it just seemed a little jarring at times. Now, both the main characters, Gendry and Kat, had really strong voice. They, you knew, you could not. The characters were very distinct from each other. They have their own distinct voice. They're really well written, and even all of the secondary and tertiary characters were voiced really strongly by Fletcher and Snyder. Even there were some characters you'd only meet for like 1 or 2 scenes. You were unique enough, or were written to the voice of that character well enough that even without a point of view on them, even with only seeing them for one or two scenes, you got a sense of the character, a sense of the character's voice. So both the authors did really well with voice. The setting. So not only do you have this, oppressive czarist state where the state teaches you what kind of citizen to be, how to think. Uh, they have these state sanctioned plays that children have to see so many times before they're a certain age so that they get the propaganda of the state in their head. And the state will just pull men into their war with the ultimate ordeal, and that's it. They'll just rip your life away and do unspeakable things in the pursuit of their interests, and you're expected to accept it. And that's the broader setting of Kievan. But the book is called Norylska Groans, and it's about a particular city in Kievan that is mostly devoted to the manufacture and processing of these giant megafauna that are a huge part of the basis of the economy of the whole country. They process the megafauna into meat at like slaughterhouses, but they also use the bones and the oils and the fats to make different products that are used in Kievan. And so, you think it's this early industrial city. There's smoke constantly billowing from the factories. There's some mines in Norylska. And there's, it's constantly snowing. There's ash coming from the factories. And it's just this filthy city that's divided into different sectors based on social classes, and even subdivided within the slums. There's different parts of the slums with different levels of the lower classes and different criminal families that are sort of tied in with the czarist nobility controlling different sectors of the city. And it's just this really awesome setting that you can really just smell and taste and feel and see. And there's just this atmosphere of violence and state repression and crime. And it's just top notch, really strong setting. The setting, the setting is pretty interesting, because you would think in something where there's so much stress on the weight of the czarist state machinery, so much stress on the state as this overarching exploitative thing going hand in hand with sort of industrializing capitalism to bear people down. You would think that the big bad in the book and the main conflict in the book would stem from the state, and in some ways it does, but the big bad isn't the czar, and the major conflict isn't caused by the czar, at least not directly. It's private interests from the criminal underground, which are sort of part nobility, part anarcho-capitalist mafia types. It's those private interests going into the state and causing trouble and sort of interfering in the state sphere that is part of the main conflict of the book. I won't go into details because of spoilers, but it's very cool that they managed to show sort of the relationship between the private and the public in this way, and not just use this setting as a way to have kind of a Mistborn thing where the big bad is the czar, and instead have a more complex, nuanced thing where the political economy does loom large and does certainly impact the plot and is impacted by the plot in some ways, but is not just this straightforward kill the emperor. You don't even see the czar on screen. Minor spoiler there, sorry. It was just really cool. So one thing that I did want to talk about is this book is extremely violent, and sometimes the violence is exciting and fun, and sometimes it's stomach twisting and horrific, and Sometimes it's, heart beating in your chest, what's going to happen next. But there are a couple of scenes where there's extreme torture in the book. And one of these scenes uh, does not work for me. It's not that it's too extreme. I don't mind extreme torture in books. It's that it feels out of place and like it doesn't really add much to the storytelling. And I made a comment when I read this scene about that, and I said, I wouldn't even mind the extremity of what's going on here if it felt like it fit more into the overall storytelling and the overall narrative. And then, sure enough, much later in the book, there's a very similar scene with a similar level of torture and extreme brutality and detail, but it adds to the storytelling. And so I didn't mind it as much. So there are some points in this story. There's one point in this story, really, where extreme violence is used in a way that I think is kind of weak. And then pretty much everywhere else in the story, including one that's very similar to the one I think is weak, it's very strong and very fun and very heart-racing and awesome. Just wanted to bring up that minor little thing. And now I want to talk about the intrigue in this book. You are going to be constantly guessing what is coming next, what is going to happen, trying to predict, the mystery, and it is tense. You will not want to put this book down. It was so hard to put it down, trying to figure out what happens next. Even when I had some of the twist at the end to figure it out, that only made it all the more scary, because the part that you do figure out, or if you do, adds even more tension, and I don't think anybody could predict the full twist at the end. It's a very Sanderson-esque twist, in that you predict part of it, maybe, but the part that you don't predict puts another wrench on it that turns it up to a whole new level. The plotting and intrigue in this is just, and the mystery is perfectly entwined with the horror elements, and it's just, chef's kiss, so good. Now, there were some minor issues with the logic of the story and relationships, mostly all well put together, the logic and relationships, and mostly everything fit together cohesively, so these are just some minor nitpicks here. First, I had some problems buying into Gendry's relationship with his wife. He spends a lot of time thinking about his wife and worrying about it, but there are like days and days that go by where he didn't even tell her he was leaving, and he doesn't show back up, and it felt like kind of like a little bit of a disconnect, like I wanted to see more about their relationship than just being told by him, although the parts where you do see him interact with his wife are really good and helped sort of alleviate that a little bit, but there wasn't as much of that as I would have liked. Maybe another couple scenes between him and his wife, him coming back to check in with her and like sort of raise the conflict on the screen, so to speak, rather than just in his head, between him and his wife and the things that he was doing, would have made it a little more believable for me. Maybe I'm being, too nitpicky, but and let's see. There was also one other little part where there's a character who you'll see finds out that they did something based on the wrong reasons, that most people, if they did that thing, I won't tell you what it is because of spoilers, and then they later had it revealed to them that they were wrong in their motivations for doing that, they would be horrified and traumatized by that knowledge. And I think having like even a small scene, even if they didn't show remorse, because this is grimdark and these characters aren't necessarily supposed to be like Heart of Gold type characters or anything, not even necessarily remorse, but like the initial shock and horror of realizing, oh, I made this mistake. And then, you could have them rationalize it away, as grimdark anti-heroes often do, But I feel like it would have elevated the horror for the reader to have the character go through sort of the horror and trauma of that action. And when I eventually do a spoiler discussion, I can get into more details about this. But, you know, that bothered me a little bit. But yeah, other than that, the internal logic of the characters, their relationships with each other and with other characters, the plot all worked really well, fit really well, and I want to talk a little bit more about the world building. So, the magic system was integrated into the world really well, and the way it was utilized by both the state and by the crime families made a lot of sense given the nature and interests of those two organizations, the way the stones affected the characters, both when they were on the characters and off, made a lot of sense, and it seemed really consistent. It helped build the world and the characters and the relationships between the characters in the world really well. There was a cool concept called the submission stick, where if you put a flawed memory stone on like a baton, and you hit someone with the baton and it contacts their skin, it like momentarily drains their memory from them, and they don't remember that why they're fighting or that they're in a fight, and it can like incapacitate them, which was really cool. The political economic relationships between the Kievan society and the Altan Ordu, from what we saw of that, fit really well together and made sense, including lost my train of thought there. The constant quoting by one of the characters of state-sanctioned playwrights or philosophers in the character's head is a nice way to show the impact of the state propaganda of that society on the ideology of the characters. And also, I liked that in the epigraphs, they quoted both Soviet philosophers and philosophers who lived under early Tsarism. Like, I caught quotes. Of course, they changed the names a little bit or changed a few words in the quote to make it match the world better. But I caught quotes at least by Tolstoy, Lenin, Trotsky, I think Stalin. And I'm sure there were others that I missed, because while I am a huge Soviet and Tsarist history nerd, I'm not as up on every single philosopher that wrote at that time. But it was really cool, especially if you're fascinated by that history, to have these real-world philosophers kind of rewritten and embedded into this world. It really helped bring the world to life. So overall, this book was really enjoyable. I couldn't wait to get back to it and see what happens next. Really well-written horror and thriller combination, and you should just pick this thing up. I give this book, if you're still watching after I've rambled on for about 30 minutes, I give this book 4 stars. Aside from those few complaints, it gave me exactly what I wanted out of it. I pretty much knew I would like this book because Michael Fletcher was one of the authors, and I love his book. And who would I recommend this book to? Anybody that doesn't mind a little bit of ultraviolence mashed up with state oppression and economic exploitation in a grimdark setting with a horror mystery plot and a really cool magic system. If that's up your alley, if you like Joe Abercrombie, if you like Mike Fletcher's other work, if you like Sanderson but wouldn't mind see it take on a more dark and horrific twist, pick up this book. It is not for the faint of heart. It's not necessarily for the squeamish, unless you like making yourself squeamish. But if you can handle this level of grimdark, check it out. Dark Portents, signing off.